Sign or get out, my wife mocked, waving papers in the house I fully paid for. She smirked as if throwing me out would break me. I signed, placed the keys on the table, and walked away. The next morning, her elite lawyer screamed at her. "Do you have any idea what you just let him do?" True story. You know that moment when your entire world shifts sideways and you're not sure if you should laugh, cry, or order a pizza? Yeah, that was me standing in my own living room, watching my wife Clarissa wave divorce papers around like she was conducting the world's most pathetic orchestra. The woman had more dramatic flair than a soap opera actress on her final episode. And trust me, she was milking this scene for everything it was worth. "Sign or get out," she sneered, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping those papers like they were winning lottery tickets. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same woman who couldn't figure out how to work our smart TV remote, but somehow managed to navigate the legal system well enough to serve me divorce papers in my own damn house. The house I paid for, by the way. Every single mortgage payment, every repair bill when her Pinterest-inspired home improvement projects nearly flooded our basement. Every cent that went into making this place livable while she spent her days at wine tastings and calling it market research for her non-existent event planning business. I looked around the room. My leather recliner that she always complained was too masculine for the living space. The 65-inch TV I'd saved up for months to buy. The coffee table I'd assembled myself because God knows Clarissa's idea of manual labor was opening a can of Diet Coke. This was supposed to be our sanctuary, our little slice of suburban paradise. Instead, it felt like I was standing in the middle of a battlefield where I'd apparently already lost the war without even knowing we were fighting. "Really?" I asked, keeping my voice as level as I could manage. "This is how we're doing this." In our living room on a Tuesday afternoon. But even as the words came out of my mouth, I realized my mistake. It wasn't our living room anymore, at least not in her mind. She'd already mentally redecorated the whole place, probably planning which of her book club friends would get the grand tour of her new single-woman pad. Clarissa's smirk could have powered a small city. She was practically glowing with what she clearly thought was her moment of triumph. "I've been planning this for months," she said, like she was announcing she'd finally mastered the art of French cooking instead of nuking our marriage. "My lawyer says I'm entitled to half of everything." Half of everything. The woman who contributed exactly $0 to our down payment, who spent more on organic face masks in a month than most people spend on groceries, who thought contributing to household expenses meant occasionally buying the expensive toilet paper. I had to give her credit, though. She'd certainly done her homework. The timing was perfect. She'd waited until I'd just gotten back from a week-long business trip, when I was tired and just wanted to collapse on my couch and pretend the outside world didn't exist. She'd probably been practicing this speech in the mirror, working on her delivery like she was auditioning for a role in a daytime drama. And honestly, her performance was pretty convincing. If I didn't know better, I might have actually believed she was the victim in this whole scenario. "You know what, Clarissa?" I said, walking over to the kitchen counter where she dramatically spread out all the paperwork like some kind of legal buffet. "You're absolutely right." The look of confusion that flickered across her face was almost worth the years of passive-aggressive comments about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong or breathed too loudly while she was watching The Bachelor. I picked up the pen, one of those cheap Bic pens from the junk drawer, which seemed appropriately symbolic, and started signing. Each signature felt like releasing a little bit of weight I didn't even know I was carrying. John Smith on the custody agreement for our non-existent kids. John Smith on the property settlement. John Smith on the final decree. My handwriting looked surprisingly steady for a guy whose life was apparently imploding in real time. "Wait," she said, and for the first time since I'd walked through the front door, she actually looked uncertain. "You're just signing? Just like that?" I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. This wasn't going according to her script. In her version of this scene, I was supposed to beg, maybe cry a little, definitely grovel, and promise to change. Instead, I was treating this whole thing with the same casual attention I gave to signing for Uber Eats delivery. "Yep," I said, clicking the pen closed with what I hoped sounded like finality. Just like that. I pulled my keys out of my pocket. House key, garage door opener, the spare key to her car that she'd given me back when she actually pretended to trust me with important things. I set them down on the counter next to the papers, the metal making a small but definitive click against the granite countertop we'd picked out together 3 years ago. The silence stretched between us like a rubber band about to snap. Clarissa opened her mouth, then closed it again. This clearly wasn't how she'd imagined this going down. She probably thought I'd fight for her, for us, for the life we'd built together. But here's the thing she never understood about me. I don't fight battles I can't win, and I definitely don't fight for people who've already made up their minds to leave. That's it, she finally managed to say. You're just going to walk away? There was something almost desperate in her voice now, like she was realizing that winning wasn't quite as satisfying as she'd imagined it would be. I looked at her one last time, really looked at her. The woman I'd fallen in love with 6 years ago, the one who used to laugh at my terrible jokes and steal bites of my dessert when she thought I wasn't looking. That woman had been gone for a long time, replaced by this stranger who saw our marriage as some kind of competition she needed to win. And you know what? She could have it. The house, the furniture, the mortgage payments, the responsibility of dealing with Mrs. Henderson next door, who complained about everything from our grass height to our music volume. All of it. Yeah, Clarissa, I said, heading toward the front door. I'm walking away. Enjoy the house. Try not to flood the basement again with your next DIY project. And with that, I stepped out into the afternoon sunshine, closing the door behind me on 7 years of marriage and what felt like a lifetime of trying to be someone I wasn't. The funny thing, as I walked to my car, I realized I felt lighter than I had in years. No more pretending to care about her sister's drama. No more nodding along when she complained about her coworkers. No more lying awake at night listening to her critique my breathing patterns. For the first time in forever, I had absolutely no idea what came next, and that felt pretty damn liberating. I guess sometimes the best revenge really is just signing on the dotted line and walking away with your dignity intact. Well, that and not having to unclog her hair from the shower drain anymore. Trust me, that alone made this whole thing worth it. I woke up the next morning in a Hampton Inn that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and broken dreams, but damn if it wasn't the most peaceful sleep I'd had in months. No passive-aggressive sighs at 2 a.m. because I was apparently breathing too loudly. No sudden midnight lectures about how I never helped with the emotional labor of remembering her mother's birthday. Just me, a questionably comfortable mattress, and the sweet sound of absolutely nothing. It was like meditation, except with complimentary breakfast and HBO. I was halfway through my second cup of hotel coffee, which, let's be honest, tastes like someone filtered it through a gym sock, but it was MY Gym Sock coffee, when my phone started buzzing. Text after text, missed calls, voicemails. For a split second, I thought maybe Clarissa had come to her senses, realized she'd made a massive mistake, and was ready to apologize for the whole dramatic divorce papers scene. Yeah, I know, I'm adorable when I'm delusional. But it wasn't Clarissa blowing up my phone. It was my buddy Marcus, and he was practically hyperventilating through text messages. Dude, you need to call me right now. This is insane. Marcus has the emotional regulation of a caffeinated squirrel, so his idea of insane could be anything from alien invasion to his favorite taco truck running out of carnitas. But something about the urgency in his messages made me actually hit the call button. Bro, Marcus said before I could even say hello, your wife is having a complete meltdown at Kingston's office right now. Kingston, that would be Harold Kingston, Esquire, the lawyer who'd probably charged Clarissa more per hour than most people make in a day just to tell her she could take half my stuff. Apparently, old Harold was having quite the morning. What do you mean meltdown? I asked, even though part of me was already grinning. Marcus works at the building across from Kingston's fancy law office, and the guy has better intel than the CIA when it comes to neighborhood drama. I'm talking full-scale, code red, DEFCON 1 meltdown, Marcus said, and I could practically hear him bouncing in his office chair. She's been screaming at him for like 20 minutes. Something about how he told her to sign papers without explaining what they meant. Apparently, she's just now realizing she might have screwed herself over. Now, I wasn't there to witness this beautiful disaster firsthand, but Marcus painted me quite the picture. Apparently, Clarissa had strutted into Kingston's office that morning expecting congratulations and maybe champagne. You know, the whole, we did it. We took him to the cleaner's celebration she'd probably been fantasizing about. Instead, she got what I like to imagine was the legal equivalent of a bucket of ice water to the face. Do you have any idea what you just let him do? Kingston had apparently shouted at her. And let me tell you, I would have paid good money to see Clarissa's face in that moment. This is a woman who once argued with a Starbucks barista for 15 minutes because they put regular milk in her oat milk latte. The idea that she might have made an actual, consequential mistake probably broke her brain a little bit. According to Marcus's play-by-play, which he was getting through the paper-thin walls of downtown office buildings, Clarissa kept insisting that everything was fine, that she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. "It's my house now," she kept saying, like repeating it would somehow make it legally binding. The poor woman genuinely thought that marriage worked like some kind of communist property redistribution program, where saying, "I do," automatically entitled her to half of everything her spouse had ever worked for. Here's what Clarissa apparently didn't understand, and what Kingston was now trying to explain to her between what sounded like migraine-inducing shouting matches. Just because we were married didn't mean she automatically owned half of everything. The house, bought before we got married, with my inheritance from my grandfather. The mortgage? In my name only because her credit score looked like a phone number from the 1970s. The cars? Mine and mine. Even the fancy KitchenAid mixer she was so proud of? Wedding gift from my parents. She's asking if she can contest it. Marcus whispered into the phone like he was narrating a nature documentary. Kingston keeps telling her that ship has sailed, left port, and is probably halfway to Bermuda by now. Apparently, by signing those divorce papers yesterday, you know, the ones she'd waved around like victory flags, she'd basically agreed to walk away with whatever was legally hers. Which, as it turns out, was pretty much just her clothes, her car, and her collection of essential oils that she swore could cure everything from anxiety to male pattern baldness. The best part? Marcus could hear her trying to blame Kingston for the whole mess. "You should have explained this better," she was apparently screaming. "You should have made me understand what I was signing. Lady, you hired a lawyer, not a life coach. It's not his job to hold your hand and explain that actions have consequences like you're a particularly slow kindergartner." I have to admit, there was a part of me that almost felt bad for her. Almost. Then I remembered the 3 years of her telling me I was financially controlling every time I suggested maybe she didn't need to spend $200 on organic face masks, or the countless times she'd rolled her eyes when I tried to explain our budget. She'd always insisted she was bad with numbers, like it was some kind of cute personality quirk instead of a fundamental life skill she refused to learn. "Oh man," Marcus continued, clearly living his best life as an accidental witness to this train wreck. "Now she's asking if there's any way to get you to come back and discuss things reasonably." Kingston just laughed. Actually laughed at her. I think I heard him say something about how she made her bed and now she gets to sleep in it. Except, you know, not in your bed because that's in your house. The irony was delicious. All those months of Clarissa acting like she was some kind of master strategist, planning her great escape from our marriage like she was plotting a heist in a Hollywood movie. She'd probably watched too many episodes of those Real Housewives shows where women took their husbands for everything they were worth and figured it was just a matter of hiring the right lawyer and saying the magic words. Turns out, real life doesn't work like reality TV. Who could have possibly seen that coming? By the time Marcus finished his impromptu legal drama recap, I was laughing so hard that other hotel guests were probably wondering if I was having some kind of breakdown. But honestly, this was the first time in years that I felt like the universe actually had a sense of humor. Clarissa had spent so much energy trying to prove she was smarter than me, more sophisticated, more deserving of the life we'd built together. And in the end, her own arrogance had been her downfall. "So what are you going to do now?" Marcus asked. I looked out the window of my hotel room at the parking lot below, where normal people were starting their normal days without any divorce drama or legal meltdowns. I said, "I'm going to order room service and enjoy the show." 3 days into my newfangled hotel lifestyle, and I was starting to feel like some kind of displaced person documentary. You know the type. Sad music playing while the narrator explains how one man's life completely imploded over the course of a long weekend. Except instead of fleeing a war zone, I was fleeing a woman who thought community property meant she could claim ownership of anything within a 50-mile radius of our former marital bed. The thing about small towns is that gossip travels faster than a NASCAR driver with a lead foot and something to prove. By Wednesday morning, I was getting texts from people I hadn't talked to since high school asking if it was true that Clarissa had kicked me out of my own house. The rumors were flying around like confetti at a divorce party, and apparently, Clarissa was the one throwing the celebration. My neighbor Mrs. Henderson called me while I was trying to enjoy what the Hampton Inn generously called continental breakfast, which was basically stale bagels and coffee that could strip paint. "John, honey," she said in that voice people use when they're about to deliver news that's either really good or catastrophically bad. "I just wanted you to know that Clarissa has been telling everyone who'll listen that it's her house now." Her house. The house that I'd spent 2 years shopping for, comparing mortgage rates like I was studying for the damn SATs. The house where I'd personally installed every light fixture because Clarissa was too delicate for electrical work, but apparently tough enough to rewire our entire marriage behind my back. The house where I'd spent countless weekends fixing everything from leaky faucets to that weird spot in the drywall where she'd tried to hang a massive mirror without finding a stud, which, by the way, is a perfect metaphor for our entire relationship. She's been strutting around the front yard like she owns the place. Mrs. Henderson continued, clearly enjoying her role as neighborhood intelligence operative. Yesterday, she had some young man over there with a clipboard, walking around taking measurements. Said something about maximizing the property's potential. Maximizing the property's potential. That's rich coming from someone whose idea of home improvement was buying throw pillows and calling it interior design. This is the same woman who once painted an accent wall lime green because she saw it in a magazine, then complained for 6 months that it didn't photograph well for her Instagram stories. But now she's suddenly Bob Vila with better hair and a worse understanding of property law. I decided to drive by the house that afternoon, partly out of curiosity and partly because I'm apparently a glutton for punishment. What I saw was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Except the train was my former life, and the wreck was Clarissa's complete inability to understand basic legal concepts. She'd set up a little command center on the front porch, my front porch, the one I'd power washed every spring for 3 years, complete with a folding table covered in what looked like real estate brochures and legal documents. The woman had essentially turned my property into her personal office space, which would have been impressive if it wasn't completely insane. But the best part? She was holding court with her book club friends like she was some kind of newly crowned real estate mogul. I could see them from my car, all gathered around her table, nodding and making supportive noises while she gestured dramatically at the house behind her. It was like watching a really bad community theater production of How to Lose Everything You Never Actually Owned. My phone rang just as I was contemplating whether driving by my own house qualified as stalking. It was my buddy Jake from work, and he was laughing before I even answered. "Dude, you need to check out Clarissa's Facebook page. This is comedy gold." I pulled over and opened the app, which I'd barely used since Clarissa had taken over our joint social media presence like some kind of digital dictator. Her latest post was a selfie of her standing in front of the house with the caption, "New chapter, new opportunities." Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need when you're brave enough to take it. Hashtag boss lady, hashtag new beginnings, hashtag property owner, hashtag living my best life. Property owner. The woman was literally claiming to own property that had never been in her name, paid for with money she'd never earned, while standing on a lawn she'd never mowed. The comments section was a beautiful disaster of friends who clearly had no idea what was actually happening, congratulating her on her new house and asking for home tours. One person even asked if she was going into real estate now. I genuinely couldn't tell if Clarissa was delusional or just really committed to this whole fiction she'd created. The deed to that house was sitting in a safety deposit box downtown, and it had exactly one name on it, John Smith. Not Mr. and Mrs. Smith, not John and Clarissa Smith, just John Smith, solo act. Purchased with inheritance money from my grandfather who'd worked his ass off in a steel mill for 40 years so his family could have something better. Every mortgage payment had come out of my account, every insurance premium, every property tax bill. Hell, even the HOA fees that she complained about constantly. Those came from my paycheck too. But according to her version of reality, she was now some kind of real estate maven who'd just acquired prime suburban property through the sheer force of her personality and superior negotiation skills. It was like watching someone claim they'd won the lottery when all they'd actually done was find a ticket someone else had dropped. The really tragic part was that she seemed to genuinely believe her own hype. This wasn't just a show for social media or a way to save face with her friends. She actually thought that filing for divorce had somehow magically transferred ownership of everything we'd shared during our marriage directly into her name. Like marriage was some kind of business merger where she'd been building equity the whole time and was now cashing out her shares. I drove home to my hotel room thinking about how we'd gotten to this point. When had Clarissa started believing that being married to someone meant automatic ownership of their stuff? When had she convinced herself that my inheritance was somehow community property just because we'd happened to be legally bound when I'd used it to buy the house? The woman had contributed exactly nothing to that down payment, unless you count the emotional support she'd provided by complaining that the house hunting process was taking too long and she was tired of looking at properties that weren't Instagram-worthy. She'd never paid a mortgage payment, never dealt with the insurance company when that tree fell on the roof, never spent a Saturday afternoon unclogging gutters or fixing the garbage disposal when it inevitably broke because she kept putting things down there that clearly didn't belong. But somehow, in her mind, all of that work, all of that money, all of those years of building something together had just been preparation for this moment when she could claim it all as her own personal prize for surviving marriage to me. It was almost admirable in its complete disconnection from reality. Almost. A week into my extended stay at Hotel Heartbreak, I got a text that made me wonder if Clarissa had finally cracked under the pressure of maintaining her elaborate fantasy life. "John, we need to talk. Come for dinner tonight. 7 p.m. It's important." No please, no explanation, just a royal summons delivered via iPhone like she was the queen of suburbia, and I was some peasant who'd forgotten to bow properly. My first instinct was to respond with something mature and reasonable, like, "How about no, you psychotic property thief?" But curiosity killed the cat, and apparently I was feeling pretty feline that evening. Plus, I'll admit it, after a week of hotel food and takeout containers that were starting to form their own ecosystem in my temporary living space, the idea of a home-cooked meal was tempting, even if that home technically wasn't hers to cook in. I showed up at 7 p.m. sharp because punctuality is one of those habits that survive even the most catastrophic life implosions. The first thing I noticed was that Clarissa had gone full Martha Stewart on the whole production. The porch light was on, there were actual candles flickering in the windows, and she'd even put out our, sorry, my good doormat. The one we bought together at HomeGoods during happier times when our biggest argument was whether it was too generic or perfectly classic. She answered the door wearing this little black dress that I hadn't seen since our anniversary dinner 2 years ago, back when she still pretended to find my jokes funny instead of sighing dramatically every time I opened my mouth. Her makeup was flawless, her hair was styled like she'd just stepped out of a salon, and she was smiling that smile she used to reserve for special occasions and apologies for major screw-ups. "John," she said, like she was greeting a long-lost friend instead of the husband she'd legally kicked to the curb just a week earlier. "I'm so glad you came. Please, come in." She stepped aside with this graceful little gesture, like she was welcoming me into a fancy restaurant instead of the house I'd been paying for since before she knew my middle name. The dining room looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. She'd used our wedding china, the expensive stuff we'd registered for, and then used maybe 5 times in 7 years because she was always worried about chipping it. There were cloth napkins, actual silverware instead of the everyday stuff, and enough candles to power a seance. The table was set for 2 with mathematical precision, like she'd used a ruler to make sure everything was perfectly aligned. "Wow," I said, genuinely impressed despite myself. "This is a lot." And it was. Clarissa had clearly spent serious time and effort on this whole production. Part of me was curious about what game she was playing, and part of me was already calculating how much this dinner setup had probably cost, since I was pretty sure my credit card was still paying for her lifestyle choices. "I thought we should do this properly," she said, pulling out my chair like I was some kind of visiting dignitary instead of the guy who used to eat cereal for dinner while watching Sports Center in his underwear. "After everything that's happened, we owe it to ourselves to have one real conversation." The food, I have to admit, was actually decent. Clarissa had ordered from Golden Dragon, this Chinese place we used to get takeout from when we were too lazy to cook but too pretentious to admit we were eating MS-gelatin lo mein straight from the container. But she'd plated everything on our good dishes like she'd been slaving over a hot stove all afternoon. Sweet and sour chicken arranged artfully next to jasmine rice, beef and broccoli that looked almost fancy when it wasn't sitting in a grease-stained cardboard container. "This is nice," I said, because even in the middle of a divorce, my mother raised me to have basic manners. Very theatrical. I couldn't help myself with that last part. The whole thing felt like dinner theater, except I hadn't bought a ticket and wasn't sure if I was supposed to be the audience or part of the cast. Clarissa's smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered like the trooper she was. "I wanted to do something special," she said, settling into her chair across from me. "We've been through so much together, and I feel like we never really got to say goodbye properly." Goodbye properly. Like our marriage was a business meeting that needed formal closure instead of the emotional train wreck it had actually become. But I played along, mostly because the egg rolls were surprisingly good, and I was curious to see where this whole performance was headed. "So," she said, cutting into her chicken with surgical precision, "I've been doing a lot of thinking this week." Here it comes, I thought. The big speech she'd probably been rehearsing in front of the bathroom mirror. I could practically see the mental note cards she'd prepared, all the key points she wanted to hit in her closing argument for why this whole divorce thing was somehow the best decision for both of us. "I realized that maybe we've both made mistakes," she continued, like she was delivering a State of the Union address instead of having dinner with her soon-to-be ex-husband. "And I think maybe we've lost sight of what really matters." She paused dramatically, probably waiting for me to lean forward with rapt attention or maybe tear up a little at her profound insights into the human condition. Instead, I took another bite of lo mein and waited for her to get to the point. This whole setup was starting to feel like a really elaborate way to ask for something, and I was genuinely curious what her endgame was. Did she want me to take her back? Did she want to negotiate better terms for the divorce? Was this some kind of weird closure ritual she'd read about in one of those self-help books she was always buying and never finishing? "The thing is," she said, leaning forward slightly like she was sharing state secrets, "I think we both got caught up in our egos. You with your need to always be right, and me with my independence." Independence. That's what she was calling her complete financial dependence on my income, and her total inability to understand basic adult responsibilities like paying bills or maintaining credit. "And I've realized," she continued, warming up to her theme, "that marriage is about compromise. It's about recognizing that we both bring different strengths to the relationship." Different strengths. I was genuinely curious what she thought her strengths were, since from my perspective, her main contributions to our marriage had been an encyclopedic knowledge of reality TV drama and an impressive ability to spend money we didn't have on things we didn't need. She launched into this whole monologue about emotional labor and how she'd been carrying the burden of managing our social life and maintaining relationships with both our families, which was news to me, since I was the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and actually called my parents more than twice a year. But I let her talk, partly because the food was decent and partly because watching someone rewrite history in real time was oddly fascinating. The best part was when she started talking about sacrifice, like she'd given up some amazing career opportunity to be with me instead of bouncing between part-time jobs and multi-level marketing schemes that never quite worked out. She painted this picture of herself as some kind of martyred wife who'd put her dreams on hold for the sake of our partnership, conveniently forgetting that her biggest dream had always been to not have to work at all. I barely made it back to my hotel before my phone started blowing up like I'd won the lottery or accidentally started World War III. Apparently, the second I walked out of that awkward dinner theater performance, Clarissa had transformed from grieving wife back into party animal faster than you could say emotional whiplash. And thanks to the miracle of social media, I had front row seats to the whole spectacular train wreck. The first notification came from Instagram. Yeah, I know, I'm too old to be getting push notifications from apps designed for teenagers and influencers, but divorces make you do weird things. Clarissa had posted a selfie that looked like it had been professionally lit, all perfect angles and mysterious shadows, with the caption, "Sometimes the best chapters of your life start when you close the book on what wasn't working. Hashtag new me, hashtag leveling up, hashtag divorce party, hashtag boss lady vibes." Divorce party. The woman was literally throwing herself a divorce party like she'd just graduated from Harvard instead of legally separating from the guy who'd been bankrolling her lifestyle for the past 7 years. And apparently, she'd invited half the town to come celebrate her newfound freedom in my house. using my furniture, probably drinking wine I'd paid for. My buddy Marcus texted me a play-by-play like he was announcing the Super Bowl. Dude, your ex-wife is absolutely losing her mind right now. There are like 20 cars parked outside your house. Someone brought a DJ. I can hear music from 3 blocks away. A DJ? At my house. On a Wednesday night. In a neighborhood where most people were in bed by 10 p.m. because they had actual jobs that required them to be functional the next morning. Then came the Instagram stories. And let me tell you, watching your ex-wife document her celebration of your divorce in real time is a special kind of modern torture that Dante never could have imagined. Story after story of women I vaguely recognized from her book club and yoga class, all holding up wine glasses and cheering like Clarissa had just announced she'd found the cure for cancer instead of successfully ending a marriage to a guy who'd apparently been holding her back from her true potential. To new beginnings, they were shouting in one video, where you could clearly see my kitchen in the background. The kitchen I'd renovated myself after Clarissa's Pinterest-inspired improvements had nearly required calling in a hazmat team. To knowing your worth, they continued, which was ironic coming from a group of women who seemed to think your worth was measured by how much you could take your husband for in a divorce settlement. One of her friends, I think it was Jessica from Pilates class, had posted her own story with the caption, "When your girl finally dumps the dead weight." Partying face woman dancing #girl power #single life. Dead weight. That's what 7 years of marriage, a mortgage, car payments, health insurance, and putting up with her mother's passive-aggressive comments at every family gathering had amounted to. Dead weight. But the real masterpiece was Clarissa's Instagram live stream, which she started around 9 p.m. when the party was apparently hitting its stride. She was standing in my living room. Excuse me, her living room, with a glass of what looked like champagne, even though I knew damn well we'd never kept champagne in the house because she always complained it gave her headaches. "Hi everyone," she said to her phone, like she was hosting her own talk show instead of broadcasting her mental breakdown to anyone unfortunate enough to follow her account. "I just wanted to thank everyone for all the love and support during this transition. You guys have been amazing." Transition. Like divorce was some kind of corporate restructuring instead of the complete implosion of a relationship. The comments were rolling in fast, mostly from people I didn't recognize telling her how brave and inspiring she was for choosing herself and refusing to settle. Choosing herself. The woman who'd spent the last 3 years of our marriage complaining that I didn't choose restaurants that photographed well for her food blog that approximately 12 people read. "I know a lot of you have been asking about the house," she continued, gesturing around the room like she was giving a virtual tour of property she'd actually paid for. "And yes, this is all mine now. It's been such an empowering experience, learning that I don't need anyone else to build the life I want." The comments exploded with fire emojis and crown symbols, and people calling her a queen for taking control of her situation. My neighbor Mrs. Henderson called me right in the middle of Clarissa's live stream, and she was practically shouting over what sounded like a full-scale block party happening in the background. "John, honey, I don't know what's going on over there, but it sounds like Mardi Gras and New Year's Eve had a baby in your front yard. Should I call the police?" "No, Mrs. Henderson," I said, watching my ex-wife toast to her newfound independence on my phone screen while her friends cheered in my background. "Let her have her moment. Trust me, reality's going to hit soon enough." And honestly, I was kind of curious to see how long she could maintain this fantasy before the bill started coming due, and she realized that independence was a lot more expensive than she'd anticipated. The party kept going until well past midnight, which I know because people kept posting about it. Someone had made a playlist called Bye Bye Boy that was apparently playing through my Bluetooth speakers I bought specifically for quiet background music during dinner parties, not for whatever drunk karaoke situation was happening in my living room. Another friend posted a picture of custom cocktail napkins that said Clarissa's Liberation Celebration with little champagne glass graphics, which meant someone had actually planned this whole thing in advance. But the absolute cherry on top of this disaster Sunday was the group photo that Clarissa posted around 1 a.m. 20-something women, all squeezed onto my sectional sofa and spilling onto my hardwood floors, holding up drinks and making peace signs like they were college fresh kids at spring break, instead of suburban wives in their 30s celebrating one of their friends legally screwing over her husband. The caption was pure poetry. surrounded by my tribe tonight. These amazing women remind me every day that I deserve more than settling for someone who doesn't appreciate what I bring to the table. Here's to writing our own stories and refusing to be anyone's side character. Hashtag tribe vibe, hashtag support squad, hashtag main character energy, hashtag divorce glow. Side character. In my own marriage, apparently, I'd been the side character in Clarissa's grand narrative about finding herself and discovering her worth, which was pretty rich coming from someone who'd spent most of our relationship complaining that I worked too much, didn't work enough, made too much money, didn't make enough money, was too social, wasn't social enough, and basically existed incorrectly in every possible way. I turned off my phone and ordered room service. Let them party in my house with my sound system and probably my liquor cabinet. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting when Clarissa woke up with a hangover and a bunch of credit card charges she couldn't actually afford, in a house she didn't actually own, celebrating a victory that was about to turn into the most expensive mistake of her life. Sometimes the best revenge really is just letting people think they've won. 2 days after Clarissa's epic divorce celebration, my phone rang at 7 a.m. with my sister Harper cackling like she'd just discovered fire. Harper's one of those people who finds other people's drama absolutely hilarious, especially when that drama involves someone she never particularly liked trying to outsmart themselves into a corner. And boy, did she have some premium entertainment for me this morning. "Oh my God, John," she wheezed between fits of laughter. "You are not going to believe what your ex-wife is telling people about why you left." Harper works at the courthouse downtown, which means she has access to better gossip than TMZ and twice the entertainment value. She's been calling everyone from your old neighbor to your college roommate's wife, spinning this absolutely ridiculous story about how you couldn't handle her success. Success. I had to set my coffee down because I was legitimately worried I might choke on it. Her success at what exactly? I asked, because I was genuinely curious what Clarissa had decided to list as her major life achievements. The woman who once tried to start a lifestyle blog that lasted exactly 3 posts before she got distracted by a new Netflix series? According to Clarissa, Harper said, clearly enjoying every second of this. You left because you were intimidated by her entrepreneurial spirit and couldn't handle being married to such a strong, independent woman. She's telling people you were threatened by her business ventures and tried to control her finances out of jealousy. Business ventures. The multi-level marketing schemes that had cost us more money than they'd ever made. The Etsy shop she'd started and abandoned after selling exactly 2 scented candles to her own mother? Or maybe she was talking about her brief stint as a social media manager for her friend's boutique, which lasted until said friend realized that posting inspirational quotes over stock photos of sunsets wasn't actually driving sales. She specifically told Mrs. Rodriguez from the grocery store, Harper continued, that you were so insecure about her success that you made her choose between her career and your marriage. And when she chose to follow her dreams, you couldn't handle it and ran away to a hotel like a coward. Career. The woman was calling her collection of half-started projects and pyramid scheme enrollments a career. This is the same person who once argued that staying home to work on her personal brand was just as valid as my actual job that came with actual paychecks and actual health insurance. Her personal brand, by the way, seemed to consist mainly of reposting motivational quotes on Instagram and occasionally selling essential oils to people who were too polite to say no. But wait, it gets better, Harper said, and I could practically hear her grinning through the phone. She also told people that you were financially abusive and controlled all the money, so she couldn't invest in herself properly. She's painting herself as this brilliant businesswoman whose potential was stifled by your oppressive financial management. Oppressive financial management, also known as trying to make sure we could pay our mortgage every month and suggesting that maybe we shouldn't spend our entire savings on inventory for another doomed business idea. I'd been the villain for wanting to see a business plan before she invested our emergency fund in what turned out to be a scam involving selling weight loss tea to her Facebook friends. The best part, Harper continued, is that she's telling everyone you never supported her dreams. Sharon from the bank said Clarissa spent 20 minutes explaining how you sabotaged her confidence by asking practical questions about her business ideas instead of just believing in her vision. Practical questions like, how much money do you need up front? And what's your plan for actually making a profit? And are you sure this isn't just another pyramid scheme that's going to cost us money we don't have? Yeah, I can see how those might have damaged her confidence in schemes that were obviously too good to be true. Oh, and get this, Harper said, building up to what was clearly going to be the grand finale of this gossip session. She told your old boss, Dave, that you were so jealous of her entrepreneurial success that you tried to sabotage her meetings with potential investors. Potential investors. She was talking about that time I'd refused to let her use our living room for what she claimed was a business meeting, but was actually just another recruitment session for whatever MLM had caught her attention that month. I'd suggested maybe she could meet her investor at Starbucks like a normal person instead of trying to turn our house into a conference room for her latest get-rich-quick scheme. Dave told her he was sorry to hear about the marriage troubles, but that he always thought you were a pretty reasonable guy. Harper continued. Apparently Clarissa got all huffy and said that was exactly the problem. You were too reasonable and couldn't understand someone with big dreams and creative vision. Too reasonable. In Clarissa's world, apparently, being reasonable was a character flaw. Being the kind of person who read contracts before signing them, who asked questions before handing over money, who wanted to see actual business plans instead of just Pinterest boards full of inspirational quotes. That made me the bad guy in her story. But here's where it gets really good, Harper said, and I could tell she was saving the best for last. Jenny from your old gym said Clarissa told her that you were so controlling about money that you wouldn't even let her invest in cryptocurrency when she wanted to. She said you forced her to miss out on being a millionaire because you were too scared to take risks. Cryptocurrency. She was talking about that week when she'd wanted to put our entire savings account into something called Dogecoin because she'd seen a TikTok video about people getting rich overnight. I tried to explain that our emergency fund probably wasn't the best place to practice high-risk investing, but she'd accused me of not believing in her research skills. Her research, by the way, had consisted entirely of social media posts and YouTube videos made by teenagers. The thing is, Harper said, everyone she's talking to knows you. They know you're not some controlling financial dictator. Mrs. Rodriguez has seen you guys together for years. She knows who is actually paying for groceries and who is adding wine and expensive cheese to the cart without looking at prices. People aren't stupid, John. That was the thing about small towns. Everybody knew everybody's business, and most people had functioning bullshit detectors. Our neighbors had watched Clarissa park her brand new SUV in the driveway of the house she'd never made a payment on. They'd seen her hosting book club meetings with catered food while complaining that we couldn't afford a vacation. They'd witnessed her spending Saturday afternoons getting mani pedis while I was home fixing whatever had broken during the week. She really thinks people are going to believe that the guy who worked 60-hour weeks to keep their lights on was somehow holding back his wife's business empire? Harper asked. The delusion is honestly impressive. It's like she's created this whole alternate reality where she was some kind of entrepreneurial genius, and you were just too small-minded to recognize her brilliance. The really sad part was that Clarissa probably actually believed her own story by now. She'd been telling it so many times, to so many people, that it had probably become her truth. In her mind, she really was the misunderstood visionary who'd been married to a man too ordinary to appreciate her extraordinary potential. Never mind that her extraordinary potential had never actually produced anything more extraordinary than credit card debt and half-finished projects cluttering up our spare bedroom. Living in a hotel for 2 weeks gives you a lot of time to think about the weird turns your life has taken, but nothing could have prepared me for the text message that arrived at 9:47 a.m. on a Friday morning from Mr. Jenkins, my 78-year-old neighbor who apparently had way too much time on his hands and the surveillance skills of a retired CIA operative. Son, the text read, you need to see this. Check your email. That woman has lost her damn mind. Now, Mr. Jenkins isn't exactly what you'd call tech-savvy. The man still thinks Netflix is some kind of fishing equipment, so the fact that he'd managed to send me a video file meant whatever was happening at my house was serious enough to warrant learning 21st century communication skills. I opened my email to find 3 video attachments with the subject line, Evidence of Insanity, Day 12. Because apparently, Mr. Jenkins had been documenting Clarissa's post-divorce activities like he was producing a nature documentary about suburban wildlife. The first video showed her in my front yard. Sorry, the front yard of the house she thought she owned, directing some guy in workout clothes like she was a movie director and he was her leading man. The guy looked like he'd stepped straight out of a fitness magazine, all perfectly sculpted muscles and teeth, so white they probably glowed in the dark. He was setting up what looked like a complete home gym on my lawn: dumbbells, exercise mats, some kind of contraption that might have been a portable squat rack. And Clarissa was standing there in brand new workout gear that probably cost more than most people's rent, gesturing dramatically and clearly giving instructions. Mr. Jenkins had added subtitles to the video, which was both hilarious and slightly concerning. Day 12 of the Crazy Lady Chronicles appeared at the bottom of the screen. Subject appears to be converting front lawn into outdoor fitness facility. Male companion of unknown origin assembling equipment. Neighbors growing concerned about property values. The second video was even better. It showed Clarissa and Mr. Muscles actually working out in my front yard like it was their personal fitness studio. She was doing these elaborate stretches that looked more like interpretive dance than exercise, while he spotted her through what appeared to be the world's most inefficient dumbbell routine. The whole thing looked like a really bad fitness infomercial, except it was happening on my property at 7 a.m. on a weekday. But the real masterpiece was the third video, which showed the aftermath of their outdoor fitness extravaganza. My previously well-maintained lawn looked like it had been hit by a small tornado. There were divots in the grass where they'd been dropping weights, equipment marks everywhere, and what looked like protein powder scattered across the front porch. It was like someone had tried to turn my yard into a CrossFit gym without bothering to ask permission from physics or common sense. Mr. Jenkins called me while I was still processing the visual evidence of my ex-wife's latest breakdown. "John, boy," he said, his voice carrying that particular mix of amusement and concern that only elderly neighbors can master. "I've been watching this situation unfold for 2 weeks now, and I gotta tell you, it's better than anything they got on cable." "What exactly has she been doing?" I asked, even though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. The videos had been disturbing enough. I wasn't sure my mental health could handle a full play-by-play of Clarissa's apparent transformation into some kind of suburban fitness influencer. "Well," Mr. Jenkins said, settling into what was clearly going to be a comprehensive report, "it started with her bringing that trainer fellow around. Nice enough kid, I suppose, but he's got about as much sense as a screen door on a submarine. They've been working out in your front yard every morning like they're training for the Olympics or some such nonsense. A personal trainer." Of course she had a personal trainer, because apparently surviving divorce required professional supervision of your squats and lunges. I wondered how she was paying for this guy's services, since her credit score was roughly equivalent to my golf handicap and twice as embarrassing. But that's not the best part. Mr. Jenkins continued, clearly enjoying his role as neighborhood intelligence operative. "Yesterday, she had him move all the equipment into your living room. I could see them through the front window, doing jumping jacks next to your coffee table and lifting weights where your couch used to be. My living room. She'd turned my living room into a home gym. The same living room where we'd hosted dinner parties and watched movies and had those long conversations about our future together back when we still had one. Now it was apparently serving as Clarissa's personal fitness studio, complete with a trainer who probably charged more per hour than most people made in a day." "Mr. Jenkins," I said, "please tell me you got that on video too." "Son, I've got everything on video. My grandson set me up with one of those security camera things, and let me tell you, it's been the best entertainment investment I ever made." He paused for dramatic effect. "But here's the thing that really gets me. She's been telling everyone in the neighborhood that this is all part of her new healthy lifestyle now that she's free from your negative influence." Negative influence? The guy who'd encouraged her to join a gym for 3 years running, who'd suggested maybe we could go for walks together or try that couple's yoga class she kept talking about. The guy who'd bought her a fitness tracker for her birthday and been told it was too pushy and made her feel bad about her activity levels. "Yesterday," Mr. Jenkins went on, "I heard her telling Mrs. Patterson that you used to sabotage her workout routine by bringing home junk food and making her feel guilty about taking care of her health." This was news to me, since Clarissa's idea of a workout routine had previously consisted of walking from the couch to the kitchen during commercial breaks, and her idea of health food was diet soda with lunch. "But the real kicker," he said, building up to what was clearly the climax of his surveillance report, "is what she told that trainer about why she's doing all this." I was watering my garden. Okay, fine, I was eavesdropping. and she said she's getting in the best shape of her life to show you what you lost. What I lost. A woman who thought exercise was a punishment and vegetables were a conspiracy, who'd spent our entire marriage complaining that I was too active and made her feel bad about her sedentary lifestyle. Now she was apparently training for American Ninja Warrior in my living room to prove some kind of point about self-improvement and personal growth. "Mr. Jenkins," I said, "you mentioned she's the heavier dumbbell?" He chuckled, clearly pleased with his own wit. "Son, I've been married for 53 years, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that when a woman starts working out in her ex-husband's living room with a trainer who looks like he was carved out of marble, she's not doing it for her health. She's doing it because she thinks it'll make you jealous. Jealous of watching my ex-wife destroy my property values while paying someone to count her push-ups in the house I'd worked my ass off to buy. Of her finally discovering exercise existed after years of telling me that my running was obsessive and my gym membership was a waste of money. The funny thing is," Mr. Jenkins continued, "that trainer kid doesn't seem to realize he's part of some elaborate revenge scheme. He just thinks he's got a client who's really committed to her fitness goals. Poor boy has no idea he's being used as a prop in whatever drama she's got playing in her head." I thought about that for a minute. Some innocent fitness professional who'd probably responded to Clarissa's inquiry about personal training services, not knowing he was about to become a supporting character in her post-divorce performance art project. The guy was probably wondering why his new client insisted on working out in her living room instead of a gym, and why she kept asking him to wear his tightest shirts during their sessions. "She's also been taking a lot of pictures," Mr. Jenkins added. "Instagram, I think my granddaughter called it. Always posing with those weights and making faces like she's conquering Mount Everest instead of lifting 10-pound dumbbells." Of course, she was documenting it all for social media. Because if you're going to have a complete psychological breakdown, you might as well make sure everyone on the internet knows about it. I could only imagine the captions. "Living my best life. Flexed biceps, #fitness journey, #new me, #divorced and thriving, showing him what I lost." "Mr. Jenkins," I said, "I owe you a beer for keeping me informed about all this." "Son," he replied, "watching your ex-wife try to deadlift in high heels on your hardwood floors has been worth the price of admission. But between you and me, I think that trainer's starting to figure out that his client might not be entirely stable. You know that moment in a movie when everything starts falling apart for the villain and you get that warm, fuzzy feeling of justice being served? Yeah, that was me on Tuesday morning when my phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree with notifications that made my entire week. It started with a text from Marcus at 10:23 a.m. "Dude, your ex-wife just got declined at Starbucks. Twice. The barista looked like she was witnessing a murder." Now, getting declined at Starbucks isn't exactly a life-altering catastrophe for most people. You just use a different card or pay cash like a normal human being. But for Clarissa, whose daily routine revolved around her Venti oat milk latte with an extra shot of entitlement, this was apparently the equivalent of being personally betrayed by the coffee gods themselves. The beautiful thing about living in a small town is that everyone knows everyone else's business, and financial embarrassment travels faster than gossip at a church potluck. By noon, I had 3 different sources confirming that Clarissa's morning had been a symphony of declined transactions that would have made a bankruptcy lawyer weep with joy. My sister Harper called me while I was enjoying a perfectly adequate lunch at a restaurant where no one knew my life story, and the waitress didn't feel the need to comment on my relationship status. "John, I don't know what you did to your credit cards, but Clarissa just tried to buy $300 worth of organic skincare products at that fancy place downtown, and apparently her card got declined so loudly that people 3 stores down heard the machine beeping. What I did to my credit cards. Like managing my own finances was some kind of vindictive act instead of basic adult responsibility. See, here's the thing about joint credit cards that Clarissa had never bothered to understand. When one person's name is on the account and the other person is just an authorized user, the person whose name is actually on the account gets to make decisions about things like credit limits and account closures. And funny thing about that, when you're going through a divorce and your soon-to-be ex-wife is living in a fantasy world where she thinks she owns half of everything you've worked for, it makes perfect sense to protect your assets by, oh, I don't know, canceling her access to credit accounts that she never qualified for in the first place. Did she try to argue with them? I asked Harper, because the mental image of Clarissa having a public meltdown over skincare products was almost too good to be true. According to Michelle, who was there getting her nails done, Clarissa tried to convince the store manager that there must be some mistake with their card reader. She actually said, "This card has never been declined before," like that was somehow going to magically fix her credit situation. The card has never been declined before. Well, no kidding, because I'd been the one paying the bills for 7 years. Funny how credit cards work when there's actually money behind them. But the real masterpiece came later that afternoon when Jake from work called me, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Bro, you need to hear this. My wife was at the Mercedes dealership looking at cars, and apparently your ex showed up trying to lease one of those fancy SUVs she's always talking about on Instagram." A Mercedes. Of course she was trying to lease a Mercedes. Because nothing says, "I'm winning at life," like a car payment that costs more than most people's rent, especially when you have no job, no credit, and no realistic way to make the payments. But I guess when you're living in a fantasy where you suddenly own property you never paid for, adding an unaffordable car loan probably seems perfectly reasonable. "Let me guess," I said, already knowing how this story was going to end but wanting to hear it anyway. "Declined. Declined so hard that the finance guy actually apologized to her," Jake said. "But here's the best part. She apparently told them that there must be some kind of mistake, that she just got a house in the divorce and her credit should be excellent." The guy tried to explain that owning property doesn't automatically qualify you for a car loan, but she wasn't having it. A house in the divorce. The house that was never in her name, bought with money she never earned, paid for with mortgage payments she never made. But in Clarissa's alternate reality, signing divorce papers had somehow magically transferred property ownership and creditworthiness directly into her bank account. The hits kept coming throughout the week. My neighbor Mrs. Henderson called to let me know that Clarissa had apparently tried to order catering for another one of her empowerment parties and been told that they needed payment up front after her card was declined for the deposit. The personal trainer from Mr. Jenkins's surveillance videos had apparently stopped showing up after his checks started bouncing. Even the Chinese restaurant where she'd gotten takeout for our awkward farewell dinner had put her on a cash-only basis. But the absolute crown jewel of this financial disaster parade came on Friday when Marcus texted me a screenshot that made my entire month. Clarissa had posted on her Instagram story, and it was a masterpiece of self-deception and damage control. "Taking a break from material things to focus on my spiritual growth. Sometimes the universe has a way of showing us what really matters. Hashtag minimalist lifestyle, hashtag spiritual journey, hashtag money isn't everything, hashtag blessings in disguise." Spiritual growth. The woman who'd spent our entire marriage collecting designer purses she used twice and skincare products that cost more than car payments was suddenly discovering the joys of minimalism. Not because she'd had some profound realization about the emptiness of material possessions, but because her credit cards had been shut down faster than a lemonade stand in a hurricane. The comments on her post were a beautiful mix of support from friends who had no idea what was actually happening. "You're so wise. Material things are just distractions from our true purpose." And confusion from people who'd been following her lifestyle content. "Didn't you just post about buying a new workout wardrobe yesterday?" My buddy Dave, who works in banking, explained the situation to me over beers that weekend. "Here's the thing most people don't understand about divorce and credit," he said, settling into what was clearly going to be an educational lecture. "Joint accounts don't automatically become individual accounts when you split up. If your name isn't on the original application, if you don't have independent income to qualify for the credit limit, if your credit score is basically a participation trophy, well, you're basically screwed when the primary account holder decides to close everything down." And that's exactly what had happened. Every credit card Clarissa had been using for the past 7 years, my cards, with my credit, backed by my income and my ability to actually pay the bills. The second I called the credit card companies to close the accounts and remove her as an authorized user, her entire financial house of cards came tumbling down like a Jenga tower in an earthquake. "The beautiful thing," Dave continued, "is that she probably never even looked at the credit card statements. She just swiped and assumed the money fairy was taking care of everything behind the scenes. Now she's learning that the money fairy was actually you, and you're not feeling particularly generous anymore." It was almost sad, Watching someone realize that their lifestyle had been completely subsidized by someone else's hard work and financial responsibility. Almost sad, but mostly hilarious, especially when that someone had spent months telling people how financially independent and empowered they were. The spa where she'd been getting weekly facials called to ask if she wanted to reschedule her missed appointment. The wine bar where she held her book club meetings sent her a polite email about her unpaid tab. Even her yoga studio reached out about her overdue membership fees. Apparently, when you build your entire social life around spending money you don't actually have, reality has a way of catching up with you pretty quickly. But the real kicker came when she tried to pay for groceries with what she thought was a working debit card and discovered that our joint checking account, the one I'd been funding while she treated it like her personal slush fund, was suddenly off limits. Because funny thing about joint accounts, when one person files for divorce and wants to protect their assets, they can legally freeze access faster than you can say transaction declined. 3 weeks after the great credit card apocalypse, I got a call that made my entire year. It was Harold Kingston, Esquire, Clarissa's own lawyer, the guy who'd probably charged her more per hour than most people make in a week to help her take me to the cleaners. Except now he sounded less like a confident legal shark and more like a guy who'd accidentally bet the farm on a 3-legged horse. "Mr. Smith," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of professional defeat that usually comes with having to deliver catastrophic news to a client who'd been living in complete denial about reality. "I need to discuss the property situation with you. There seems to have been some misunderstanding about the legal ownership of the marital residence." Misunderstanding. That's one way to describe a woman living in a house she doesn't own, can't afford, and has no legal right to occupy, while telling everyone in town that she's a property owner and successful independent businesswoman. I guess complete psychological break from reality was too many syllables for legal correspondence. "What kind of misunderstanding?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what kind of misunderstanding he was talking about. The kind where someone signs legal documents without reading them, hires a lawyer without understanding what they're actually paying for, and spends 3 weeks living in a fantasy world before reality comes knocking with eviction papers. "Well," Kingston said, clearly struggling with how to explain that his client was basically squatting in her ex-husband's house. "It appears that Mrs. Smith may have misinterpreted her rights regarding the property. The house is titled solely in your name, purchased before the marriage with inheritance funds, and the mortgage obligations are exclusively yours. She has no legal claim to the property and no right of occupancy following the divorce decree." No legal claim, no right of occupancy. In lawyer speak, that translates to your ex-wife is about to get the kind of reality check that comes with a sheriff's escort and a moving truck. Kingston was basically telling me that Clarissa had spent the last month playing house and property she had no more right to than if she'd broken into a stranger's home and started redecorating. "So what you're saying," I said, enjoying this conversation more than I probably should have, "is that she needs to move out." "Yes," Kingston replied, and I could practically hear him loosening his tie through the phone. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Smith seems to be under the impression that the divorce settlement included the house. She's been resistant to accepting the legal reality of her situation." Resistant to accepting reality. That was definitely one way to describe someone who'd been posting Instagram stories from my beautiful new home, while legally having no more right to be there than a door-to-door salesman who'd decided to move in after his pitch. The eviction process, as Kingston explained it, was going to be about as pleasant as a root canal performed by an angry ex-wife with a rusty spoon. Clarissa had 30 days to vacate the property, during which time she could contest the eviction in court if she had any legal grounds to do so. Spoiler alert, she didn't. But here's where it gets really interesting. Apparently, Clarissa had spent those 30 days not packing or looking for a new place to live, but doubling down on her fantasy that somehow, through the power of positive thinking or maybe just sheer stubborn denial, she was going to magically become the legal owner of my house. Marcus called me 2 weeks into the eviction period with updates that were better than any reality show on television. "Dude, she's hired a moving company," he said, barely containing his laughter. "But not to move out. She's having them rearrange the furniture like she's redecorating. I watched them carry your couch from the living room to what used to be the guest bedroom. It's like she's playing house with a moving crew." Playing house with a moving crew. The visual was almost too perfect. Clarissa, standing in the middle of a house she didn't own, directing professional movers to relocate furniture she had no claim to, probably telling them about her vision for the space, while completely ignoring the legal documents that said she had about as much right to be there as a trespasser with delusions of grandeur. But the real entertainment started when the 30-day notice expired and the sheriff's department got involved. Because apparently, when you're living in someone else's house without permission, at some point actual law enforcement has to explain to you that occupancy requires things like ownership or lease agreements, or at least some basic connection to reality. Mrs. Henderson called me that morning, and she was practically vibrating with excitement. "John, honey, there are 3 police cars outside your house right now, and Clarissa is standing on the front porch with a stack of papers arguing with a sheriff's deputy about property rights. It's like watching a really sad episode of Judge Judy, except nobody's getting paid to watch this train wreck." I could picture it perfectly. Clarissa, probably dressed in her most "I'm a successful businesswoman" outfit, waving around divorce papers, and maybe some of those real estate brochures she'd been collecting, trying to convince a sheriff's deputy that she had a legal right to live in a house that had never been in her name. The deputy, meanwhile, was probably wondering how his day had gone from routine evictions to amateur legal theater. "She's trying to show them her divorce papers," Mrs. Henderson continued, clearly enjoying her front row seat to the Clarissa show. "But I think the deputy is explaining that divorce papers don't magically transfer property ownership." Her face is getting redder by the minute. The eviction process, when it finally happened, was apparently like watching someone's entire world collapse in real time. According to Mr. Jenkins, who'd positioned himself strategically in his front yard with a cup of coffee and the kind of professional curiosity that comes with 78 years of life experience, Clarissa had tried every possible argument to avoid leaving. First, she'd claimed there was a mistake in the paperwork. Then she'd insisted that she had rights as a spouse that superseded property law. She'd even tried to argue that she'd made improvements to the house that gave her some kind of equity claim, apparently forgetting that her improvements had mostly consisted of Pinterest projects that had required professional intervention to prevent actual structural damage. But the moment that made Mr. Jenkins's entire month was when Clarissa tried to take the PlayStation. "Son," he told me later, "I've seen some desperate moves in my time, but watching a grown woman argue with a sheriff's deputy about who owns a video game console was something special. She actually claimed that since you played it while you were married, it was community property." Community property PlayStation. The gaming console I'd bought with my own money, connected to my own TV, in my own house, was somehow community property because we'd happened to be married when I'd occasionally used it to unwind after work. By that logic, every sandwich I'd eaten during our marriage should have been jointly owned too. The deputy, according to Mr. Jenkins, had handled the situation with the kind of professional patience that probably comes from dealing with people who think reality is negotiable. "Ma'am," he'd apparently said, "the receipt shows Mr. Smith's name. It was purchased before the marriage, and it's connected to a television that also belongs to Mr. Smith in a house that belongs to Mr. Smith. You need to pack your personal belongings and leave the premises." Personal belongings. That was the key phrase that apparently sent Clarissa into what Mr. Jenkins described as a full-scale meltdown that would have made a toddler proud. Because when you've been living like you own everything around you, being told you can only take what's actually yours is apparently a life-altering shock. 2 months after signing those divorce papers with the same enthusiasm I'd shown for pizza delivery receipts, I finally walked back into my house. Not Clarissa's house, not our house, but my house, the one I'd paid for, maintained, and apparently defended in what felt like the world's most expensive property law seminar. The first thing I did was open every single blind that Clarissa had kept permanently closed because natural sunlight gives me migraines and ages your skin. Suddenly, the whole place felt like it could breathe again. Light poured through the windows like the house itself was exhaling after holding its breath for 7 years. It was like watching a time-lapse video of something coming back to life. I walked through each room, taking inventory of what had survived Hurricane Clarissa's departure. The good news? She'd actually left most of the furniture, probably because moving it would have required planning and money. 2 things that had been in short supply during her final weeks as an unauthorized occupant. The bad news? She'd apparently tried to take every single thing she could carry, including the coffee maker I'd bought specifically because it could handle my morning routine without requiring a degree in engineering. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I invited my buddies over for steaks and beer in my own backyard. No permission needed, no negotiations about guest lists or dinner topics that were appropriate for mixed company. Just guys, meat, fire, and the kind of conversations that don't require subtitles or sensitivity training. Jake brought the beer, Marcus handled music that didn't sound like it belonged in an elevator, and Dave showed up with enough ribeye to feed a small army. We grilled, we laughed, we told stories that would have made Clarissa roll her eyes and launch into lectures about emotional intelligence and toxic masculinity. It was perfect. To John's freedom, Dave said, raising his bottle as the sun started setting behind the fence I'd built myself because Clarissa wanted privacy from neighbors who didn't understand our lifestyle. To Clarissa, I countered, who taught me two very important lessons. Everyone looked at me expectantly, probably wondering if I was about to get sentimental or philosophical about love and loss and personal growth. First, I said, taking a long drink of beer that tasted better than any wine she'd ever insisted we needed to appreciate. Never marry someone who loves your wallet more than they love you. And second, never underestimate how fast a lawyer will turn on you when the money runs out. The laughter that followed was the kind that comes from people who've watched a friend survive something catastrophic and come out the other side with his sense of humor intact. We stayed up until midnight, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the simple pleasure of not having to explain why we found things funny or justify our right to exist in our own spaces. Later, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up the aftermath of an actual enjoyable evening, I thought about Clarissa's greatest hit from our marriage. Without me, you'd have nothing. She'd said it during one of our final fights, back when she was still pretending that threats and emotional manipulation might convince me to change my mind about wanting out. Turns out, without her, I had everything that actually mattered. I had my house back, my peace of mind restored, my bank account protected, and my weekends free from wine tastings and couples game nights where everyone pretended to care about each other's juice cleanses and spiritual awakenings. The really beautiful part? Clarissa had unknowingly written the perfect ending to this whole story herself. She'd been so convinced that she was the prize, the catch, the irreplaceable component that made my life worth living. She'd been so sure that leaving me would devastate me, that taking half of everything would leave me broken and desperate. Instead, she'd given me the greatest gift imaginable, proof that I was better off without her. Every declined credit card, every legal reality check, every moment of her public meltdown had been like watching the universe provide its own punchline to a joke I hadn't even known I was telling. The best revenge, it turns out, wasn't plotting or scheming or trying to make her life miserable. It was just letting her reveal exactly who she'd always been underneath all the pretense and manipulation. It was signing those papers, walking away with my dignity, and letting natural consequences do the rest. And now, sitting in my living room with my feet up on my coffee table, drinking beer from the bottle without anyone commenting on how it looked unprofessional or low class, I realized that Clarissa had been right about one thing. Without her, I really did have nothing. Nothing but peace, quiet, financial security, and the freedom to live in my own house without permission from someone who'd never actually contributed to paying for it. Nothing but the ability to make decisions without committee meetings disguised as conversations. Nothing but the chance to discover what my life could be when it wasn't being managed by someone who thought marriage was a hostile takeover. Clarissa taught me that sometimes the best chapters of your life begin when you finally close the book on what wasn't working. Thanks for the lesson, ex-wife. It was expensive, but worth every penny.